The spirit world grew silent as Gan paused in his retelling of events and kept a watchful eye on the once jovial lover of fine teas. Iroh took a deep breath, his eyes filled with surprise and concern. "When did this happen?" he asked quietly. "Oh, most recently," Monk Gan replied somberly, noticing the change in his demeanor. Iroh rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I know of young Law only through my conversations with Jinora here in the spirit world. She has not visited me lately. Now I understand why." He sighed heavily, the weight of the tragic news visibly affecting him. Gan allowed him a moment of silence to process the information. Iroh leaned back, reminiscing about his past encounters with Jinora and Rohan in the spirit world. Jinora has always been a wise and insightful friend. During our meetings, she would share her knowledge of the spiritual realm and seek guidance on matters concerning the balance between worlds. As for Rohan, I watched him grow up. He was Jinora's best pupil, you see. Gan nodded and broke his silence with a hushed whisper. "Oh yes, a rare ability those two have. You know, in the 2 centuries I've been watching people from the ethereal bushes, Jinora was the only one who was able to watch me back." Iroh regained some of his joviality with a chuckle. "That doesn't surprise me. She is the most gifted airbender I've ever met." Gan shifted in his seat again. "Yes, well, you have no idea what it's like to be invisible for hundreds of years and then see someone wave to you." Iroh smiled and poured Gan another cup of tea as the unique spirit went on. "As for Jinora's absence of late, I can only say it is not entirely due to her grandnephew's injury. As for Law, though, his brave yet reckless actions led him to this unfortunate fate. And poor Rohan, the guilt and sadness that weighed upon him were immense." One of the smaller spirits nearby piped in, "But Gan, what about Dante Jr. and the others you were talking about?" Iroh, still in a contemplative mood, nodded his agreement. "Yes, I was wondering why a story about a family from the Water Tribe, who I know of also, would extend all the way to Republic City." Gan shifted again, an action Iroh was starting to recognize as uncertainty. "Well, I struggle myself to understand the full nature of what I call the summoning. As I stated at the beginning of this particular story, I was spreading my invisible essence over the backs of clouds, an act I've become immensely fond of, when I was summoned." Iroh gave Gan an inquisitive look, imploring him for more details. "All I can tell you is what I surmised myself. I have been summoned 4 times in my travels, and each of those times seemed to revolve around a different nation. However, I could find myself being summoned to a different part of the world and see what appeared to be random events play out. You see, my friend, what I've surmised about the summoning is this. The events I see unfold are of historic significance to the 4 nations, and each time I'm pulled to another location, the events I see there always connect to the events of the initial summoning." Gan looked back to the small spirit that had spoken before continuing. "And yes, my little friend, this time was no different. You see, Rohan and Law's grandfather knew about Varys and Varric Pharmaceuticals as well. They knew the doctors there provided the best chance for Law's recovery, and that is where they went." The spirits around them grew in number as the narrative unfolded. Iroh sipped his tea and listened intently as Gan resumed his tale. It was in the quiet hours of the early morning when Dr. Varys arrived at Varric Pharma. Her private car pulled up to the entrance, its headlights cutting through the crisp morning fog like a hot knife, casting long shadows across the snowy pavement. The low hum of the engine filled the silence as the security guard, recognizing the familiar vehicle, sprang into action, opening her door with an air of deference. "Dr. Varys, I wasn't expecting you back so soon," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. You know you don't have to hold the door open for me, Otto. I'm not my father. She took the hand he offered as she stepped out of the vehicle while adding, and you should also know my vacations always get cut short. He nodded his understanding, even as he continued to rush over and open the large glass door for her. Sorry, old habits, he said, with an unapologetic smirk and a respectful bow. Inside the lobby, a young nurse and a desk clerk were engaged in a light-hearted chat. They straightened abruptly as she entered, their conversation dying down. Noticing their stiffness, Varys couldn't help but jest. At ease, soldiers, eliciting hushed giggles from the pair as she passed by. From the corner of her eye, she saw a young nurse hurrying towards her, a cup of hot tea in her hands. Dr. Varys, I figured you might be tired from your flight, so I brought you some fire lily tea with lemon. Thanks, June, you're the best. Varys reached for the cup and quickly drank its steamy content. Careful, that's still. Eyes wide and alert, Varys handed back the empty cup to a surprised June. Thanks, I needed that. Now tell me, has Dr. Solaris arrived yet? June blinked away her hesitation before replying, yes, she is already with the patient. Dr. Varys nodded appreciatively. Thank you, June. She started to walk away before turning back to add, and feel free to go get some sleep. I happen to know your shift ended hours ago. The young nurse blushed as she reluctantly took her advice. Still tired from the unexpected flight and lack of sleep, Varys did her best to compose herself before opening the door to her patient's room. On entry, she saw Dr. Solaris perform a chi reading as two master airbenders grieved over the young patient. One she recognized as Rohan, whom she met previously through her parents. The other, his back turned toward her, was an elderly man, and from Varys's understanding of air nomad culture, had the tattoos and attire that represented high esteem in nomad society. Recognition dawned on Varys, and she greeted them both. Rohan, Milo, I'm so sorry I got here as soon as I could. Milo's voice trembled as he replied, I know you both traveled a long way to get here, and I'm grateful. Solaris looked up sympathetically as she finished her assessment of the young patient. Milo continued, It's just Law is my grandson, and I want the best treatment for him. He will have it, Varys assured him. She turned to Solaris, who stepped forward with a subtle nod. I've finished my initial chi reading and have determined that most of the damage is localized in the left temporal lobe. Dr. Solaris solemnly informed them before going on. However, once we run scans through the hydro and synaptic sensors, we'll have more data to help prepare a treatment and hopefully find a way to help him recover from the injury he sustained during the Equalist attack. Rohan sighed heavily, guilt in his voice. I should have been there for him in person. I could have prevented this if I hadn't. Milo put a comforting arm around him. It's okay, brother. At least you were at the temple. I'm the one who should have been there. They both started to give in to their grief before Milo looked towards Solaris with a glint of hope. Doctor, your experience as a former fire sage must provide you with invaluable insights. Is there anything you can do for him? Dr. Solaris thoughtfully replied, While techniques I learned at the temple have led to me developing chi guiding, I'm afraid the skill will be of little use here. But rest assured, Dr. Varys and I will merge our expertise in waterbending and firebending practices to determine the optimal treatment plan for him. Trusting their abilities, Milo expressed his confidence in the doctor's efforts. I know you will do everything possible to bring my grandson back to us. Dr. Varys echoed their resolve. You have our word, Milo. Law will be back on Air Temple Island before you know it. Grateful, Milo bowed his head before returning his gaze to his grandson. Rohan offered his heartfelt thanks. We are very grateful for your dedication in this difficult time. Acknowledging their appreciation, Dr. Solaris compassionately nodded. It's our pleasure. Now let's get to work. Time is of the essence. Through the early hours of the morning, Varys and Solaris worked side by side beneath the blue and white lights of the lab. Varys pored over data, once written on age-worn, water-bending text, now displayed through the illumination of her computer monitor. Meanwhile, Solaris meticulously scanned through research papers, her tired eyes drifting sluggishly. Solaris's voice broke the silence. There's an old water-bending method called Wai Shui that focuses on manipulating temporal lobe circulation, she lethargically suggested. Manipulate how? Varys quickly asked with a stern visage. Solaris hesitated before responding. Well, I suppose it would be through a form of bloodbending. Varys gave her friend a vexed look at the mention of the controversial craft. You know how I feel about that. Besides, we haven't even run the hydro and synaptic scans yet, Varys reminded her. Solaris relented apologetically. You're right. Once we have a clearer image from the scans, we can narrow down our options, of course. After a moment of silence, Varys could feel tension build in the room. She decided to deflate it with a tactful redirection. You know who would be ideal for running the scans? Dr. Lei Song. Despite her tiredness, Solaris seemed more alert at the mention of his name. Yes, he's brilliant at what he does. I'll be training Lu Chan tomorrow morning. I can fill in Lei Song on the patient's case then. Her cheeks flushed slightly like a gentle sunrise, a transition that didn't go unnoticed by her colleague.